Let's try to address some of the questions.
I can give a quick answer. This is for research. Therefore, this really just for discussion. I'm putting up front that my comment can be half wrong or even more so. Other panelists, please also, not panelists, the tutorial speakers, please jump in when I say something wrong. So the first question is by Karen about how do you define security? I think that's a very good question, very, very good. Especially she pointed out that there's a question about the trust. What's the relation between trust and security? Trust whom for what? So personal understanding. I think all the security starts with the trust. There's an excellent book by Schneier on the liars and outliers that really handles this question really well. So therefore, the trust is not black and white, and that's Kathy gonna explain how the recent work she did with Van precisely addressed the question, trust whom for what? So looking forward to that part of the tutorial. The second question is by Ken regarding the tension between global interdomain routing versus the local one, to see whether the routing security has a desire to avoid the common root of trust, if I read it correctly. I think there are actually separable issues here. Again, personal understanding, and others, please correct me. There's authentication. First, to figure out whom you're talking to. And then the second step is then how much you trust this entity to do what. This goes back to the basics of this tutorial, that is the trust schema. Let's give you the precise definition on that. Regarding the common root, my personal understanding is that we don't need a common namespace. So therefore, there's not a 30,000 David Smith. That could still be made to work, but the world would be very complicated in that situation. Therefore, if DNS can offer us the top-level unique domains that allow us to build unique names, then we can follow that namespace to do authentication to see whether I'm indeed the entity I claim my name is, then starting from there. I also have a second comment there, that is, like Alex mentioned earlier, think about the global routing system. It is an application on its own. So therefore, the basic concept we discussed today, I hope applies to that global routing application as well. I think the trust zone has a shared trust anchor. Like the Ron Rivest defined, that's about 30 plus years back, there can be large number of local trust anchors. The question is how they establish trust relations in between. There's one little figure in Alex's talk about the multiple trust anchors. They need to establish trust relations in between. So it's not a common trust zone per se, but ICDSI is a simple distributed security something. I lost the details. Dave Warren asked the question, to what extent are the trust relations among application entities independent from the trust relations among forwarders? That's a great question. If the forwarder state is established by whatever the trust relations that's guard the routing and the forwarding, and that's what that is. I do not believe one needs direct coupling between application trust relations and the forwarding system trust relations. Of course, if the forwarding system is entirely doomed, you cannot communicate. That's given.
I mean,
Sure.
for this one, it's kind of interesting question, and I think what we have, at least with the NFD and DN, what we have there is not necessarily maybe a right model, because when I define the NDN connectivity, I kind of define it through your ability to send interests, and so that they go somewhere proper way, and the ability to attract interests. Because if you're talking about from the application perspective, so it's application needs to kind of convince the network that its prefix is in some way can retrieve, I mean, this application can retrieve data or publish data, and the network should be able to bring some of the interest for this namespace to you. So in that respect, there's some kind of a relationship with the forwarding state potentially. So application is defining the forwarding state.
You talk about the routing announcement. Yes.
Not necessarily routing announcements. It can be this prefix propagation and ability to do self-learning. So you can, I mean, you receive some interest and then you have a proof that you give to somebody else that, oh, I actually own the prefix, and it builds up some forwarding state. It's not necessarily routing information.
Well, I think that's the same thing. I agree with you. But also I think that's the same as I mentioned earlier. That is the routing and the forwarding state, they have their own application. In that application domain, yes, you have entities, they have the security credentials. I think what you are saying is that can be the same security credential. That's a proof I'm the owner of this namespace. That is the same namespace you use for your application. I think we agree on that. But when you use for forwarding, that's a kind of separate use case. I mean, the use case is the usage, I would say this way. I think Karen next brought up a very good question. That is, she said, I think you are saying that the idea is to design mechanisms first and then figure out what sort of security they provide. That's an excellent statement. I think this is the research, so everything is open. But for specifically that question, I'd suggest people tune into a talk given by Alex Haldeman at I think it's a 2015 NDN community meeting. Thanks to NIST, they captured all the presentations, so we can go back there. I'll send you a pointer. There's a slides there as well, where Alex, not this guy, the other one, Alex H, a well-known name in the security domain, he pointed out that in today's efforts, mostly people define a security threats. Then you define solutions against those specific threats. And he pointed out that we are not able to speculate what will be the future security threat, but we can define the mechanisms. So therefore, I think NDN security is taking the approach. That is, can we start from the first principle to build essential, I would say, defense mechanisms into the system? Then from there, then you can evaluate what kind of threat it prevents and what kind of threat it still needs to be further enhanced. But that's a really excellent question there. I think the next one is by Dave Oren again. The question is, who is trusted to inject the routing information to fill in the forwarding table? I wasn't sure what is the reason that you need at least the two principles to agree to make this reasonable, secure. Okay, you say name owner, yes, and infrastructure owner. You know that infrastructure is owned by multiple entities, so therefore it's really about whether everyone can authenticate the name owner. The second one is how can you allow caches to see enough about the application data to do things like a cache space management, prefetching? That's an excellent question. I don't have an answer to that yet. But I want to point it out. There's, I think, several dozens of papers published on specifically this question. So maybe someone could do a literature survey or something to summarize. I do remember, I think the CCNX had some solutions to this.